Alex Pietrangelo simply doesn't want to play for Canada. If you missed it, Vegas announced Sunday that he would be sitting out of the tournament due to an ailment. Later on that night, he played 24 and a half minutes against the infamously physical reigning Cup champion Florida Panthers. Yeah, let's just let that one sink in for a second. He's got an ailment that's not so bad that you can't play, but it is enough to get you out of your extra hockey duties. Yeah, this is pretty much OV All-Star Game vibes, where the dude would just ask not to be selected. Pietrangelo doesn't care, or at least he doesn't care enough. Don't get me wrong, I get not wanting to risk injuries and to prioritize the actual NHL season, but this just goes to show what these players really think about the Four Nations, and that is that it's simply a tune-up for next year's Olympics. But to me and every other hockey fan, it is so much more. We've been clamoring for best on best for almost a decade. Sure, Four Nations is a made-up one-time mini tournament, but I, for one, cannot wait to see the best players go against the best players. So if a guy doesn't want to be on Team Canada, then I don't want him on Team Canada now or next year on the Olympic roster. To me, there are way too many talented right-handed defensemen in Canada to take someone who doesn't care to be there. So if Pietrangelo doesn't want to be on the Four Nations team, to me, he shouldn't even be considered for the Olympics. Anyways, I'm curious to see if anyone else does the same. Does Mark Stone head to the LTIR in the next week? Could we see Austin Matthews take a step back with the injuries he's had this year? Well, I really hope not, because best on best is only best on best when every country is at their strongest. With that, welcome into Top Shelf Face-Off Edition, presented by our friends over at Enterprise. I'm Aidan Thakkar, joined by my guys Levi Smith, Kyle Cushman, and John Matisz. Guys, we are like 3 weeks away, I think exactly, or maybe 3 weeks plus one, till puck drop of Best on Best Hockey. First time since 2016. The world has changed a lot since those days in terms of who's good and who's not in the hockey world, and I'm so excited. So even if some of these players might not be, I'm pumped. And the next couple weeks, sports are really good, actually.
Yeah.
You know, there's no football for a while, but 2 weeks away from the Super Bowl 2. Follow Super Bowl up right with
Daytona 500.
Daytona 500. Come on.
Auto racing.
Definitely knew that as well. But then we can play right into March, and everyone knows March gets really good. But I got to ask, maybe some of these players aren't stoked, but are we more excited for Four Nations or Mahomes going for a third straight Super Bowl?
Four Nations. Four Nations by a landslide. Just parity. That's what hockey's all about, is parity. Football, I'm seeing the same guy go to the Super Bowl every single year. And you look at like the landscape of hockey. Is Canada even the best country anymore? I don't know, but it's Four Nations by
They haven't played against each other in 10 years, so there's a lot to be up for debate. You can make cases for other teams. I still think Canada might have the most talent, but some of these other countries might be. We're going to be getting into that over the next couple weeks. Yeah. We got a lot of time leading up to the Four Nations. But right now, there's less to talk about. But there are some stories. We had some stories coming out this weekend, and the big one, I was just talking about it, Alex Pietrangelo. The first person to withdraw from the tournament, not because he's injured, presumably, and can't play. He can play, but he's choosing not to. So what do we think? Is there an actual injury behind this? Is this an ailment, or is this just a guy simply resting up for a playoff run?
I think he's resting up for a playoff run. I'm not going to accuse Pietrangelo of, lying. I'm sure he's hurt. But there's hurt and then there's significantly injured. And if he's hurt and then plays 24 minutes the night that he announces this, departure from the Four Nations, that raises some eyebrows, right? How bad is it really? You've got a nice lead up here to the tournament. I'm sure you'll get over whatever minor thing it is. But one, maybe it isn't minor and he's going to have some sort of procedure during the Four Nations. I don't know. I'm totally speculating because they're being so vague about it. But optically, it was not a good look. For Vegas to be throwing him out there in a big game, big minutes, and obviously it being the Golden Knights, people get a little extra suspicious considering their history with injuries and all that in LTIR. But I don't know. It's one of those things where I'm sure the NHL head office is not happy with how this all went down because this is an NHL-run tournament. So when the players aren't fully invested, and I'm not saying that the other players aren't, but when Pietrangelo goes, I'm not fully invested in this, it gives off, marketing-wise, sales-wise, it gives off the wrong vibe that, hey, the players don't really care.
And I think the interesting part here is that they're announcing it now when the tournament's still, a couple weeks away from them, even going for the break. So it's very weird timing. I do believe that there's something that he's working through. Sure. Clearly, they want to use the break to rest up for the stretch run rather than go and play for Canada, which is a big issue when you're playing 24 minutes later that night. But yeah, the timing of the announcement is the part that's most confusing to me.
Yeah, everyone at this point in the NHL has got something.
Oh,
There's
yes.
something hurting them or whatever, and I think it's just some of these guys might not feel that it's that crucial for them to be a part of it. It's not their one chance to win an Olympic gold medal, like a 2016 Olympics or next year even might be. But do you guys agree with my point that if he's choosing to bow out of this, it might damper his chances on being in the team next year?
I think it should, and like history tells us, Hockey Canada can be a little petty. Like I know that with Nick Suzuki, he hasn't gone to the World Championships very often, and I don't know. It's hard to tell what's like kind of rumor and what's fact, but there's sort of a rumor that they're holding that against him, and that's become a thing where, well, sorry, Nick, you didn't kind of, go to this World Championship that no one cares about when we want you to.
You don't pick and choose.
Yeah, essentially, or like pick and choose sometimes, but not like completely rule out World Championships every year. So it's possible that Pietrangelo gets sort of like blacklisted in this way, and I guess from his perspective he's going like, hey, I won 2 cups, I've won other medals internationally, I'm kind of over this whole thing, but still it seems a little strange.
And he's one of the only guys that would be returning from the last time we saw them play in 2016, which I think is a big loss for Canada because I think they are valuing that for sure. But I want to talk about who's going to replace him because there's lots of options here. When I said there's a lot of right-handed defensemen, there are a lot of right-handed defensemen. Uyghur, Bouchard, Dougie Hamilton, Chychrun, all these guys who, Chychrun's left-hand but plays on the right side. Sorry, I shouldn't have gone to him first. But there's Ekblad, there's Doughty, there's all these guys. I want to ask, who does replace him on this team?
I think in terms of if you want to replace like the prototype of Alex Pietrangelo, my answer would be Mackenzie Weegar. I think, first of all, conveniently has the same amount of points as him this year. But that's not why I'm going with this answer. He's just a big body, shutdown defenseman, blocks a lot of shots. He also leads the Flames in assists, which is great, but he does everything that you need him to do. Obviously, plays on the right side as well. And I think, Evan Bouchard, sure, like maybe he was snubbed, maybe he's left off the team, but if you're replacing Alex Pietrangelo, like you have an idea of kind of what he brings to the table, and Evan Bouchard does something different. He's the offensive guy there, and they didn't include him on the team for a reason. They don't need that production there. So I think Mackenzie Weegar is the way to go. I will also note, if he can get his legs back under him quick enough, Drew Doughty will be interesting to see because you want to talk about a guy who's had experience the way that he has. He's been playing for Team Canada all the way back to the 2010 Olympics. So I think that's a guy who, he's still coming back. He's expected to return, I think, in the next 5 games for the Kings. If he can get his legs under him quick enough and get back to game speed, I think they would go with him just for he brings the veteran qualities as well. But if he's looking a little bit sluggish, I think Mackenzie Weegar is the safe pick for me.
I like Uyghur a lot. He plays both sides of the ice as well, so you have that versatility with a smaller roster. So if there's an injury or you need to mix things up, he's very versatile, very, very good at playing both sides of the ice. He's comfortable doing that, so that's a big factor for him as well. And he's been great at the World Championships for Canada recently, too, over the last couple of years, where we talk about somebody like Suzuki or other players maybe not going to the Worlds and not helping their case. Uyghur is a guy that has gone, has performed very well there. That could be something that helps his case as well. But you talk about Pietrangelo bowing out of the tournament. Drew Doughty earlier this week, he's not even back yet, but he made it very clear that if there's interest from Hockey Canada to name him to this roster, he wants to be on it. He wants to play. He doesn't want the break. So that's a very interesting choice that they'll have to make if Drew Doughty does come back here.
Yeah, I think Uyghur checks off all the boxes, the versatility, etc. The Doughty factor is really interesting because he's got the gold medals. He can also slide in nicely as like your top shutdown guy, like the way that the blue line is shaking out right now. I mean, we assume it's Taves and Makar, and then it gets a little like murky, especially with Pietrangelo going down. So, does Doughty slide in on that second pair with like Morrissey or Sanheim or Theodore, and it becomes sort of that really rock solid second pair? Because I feel like Parayko is more like third pair, 7th D. So I feel like, if Doughty's up to let's say 90% of his capabilities, when you factor in the heart and soul aspect of him joining the team, the veteran aspect, the guy has, before he was injured, I mean, he's been elite for like 15 years. And he looked fantastic last year. So if he's back to 90% of himself, I think it'll be a really tough decision between him and Uyghur.
The other thing that Drew Doughty said this week is that he's not coming back and playing like 9 games when he returns to the lineup. They're specifically waiting until he's good to go to play 15, 20 plus minutes when he returns to the lineup. So when we see Drew Doughty back in the Kings lineup, we should expect 90+% Drew Doughty, which lends to him potentially being a guy that could hit the ground running with this break and then be good to go.
And from a team perspective, the Kings would want him to play in this, right? Like, a lot of teams are going, oh, I wish our players weren't involved in this. There's an injury risk. Well, like, Doughty hasn't played, so this is going to gear him up. Yeah. And then for their stretch drive, assuming he doesn't get re-injured in the tournament, he's kind of hitting the ground running a little bit more. So I think, there's kind of like a balance there where you've got the team that's probably pushing for him. He's obviously being vocal about it. And then, Hockey Canada is certainly going to be watching him.
I think for me, my decision would be if he's healthy and they want to slide him into the lineup for game 1, if that's what they're looking for, a defenseman to come and play on that team in every single game in that tournament, it's probably Drew Doughty. If they're looking for an insurance guy, Uyghur makes more sense to me. He can play both sides. If you bring him, he's happy to be there, and he's probably happy not to be playing too. He's probably not happy to be not be playing, but he's happy to be there. Where if you bring Drew Doughty, he's got to play.
Yeah, you got to go. You make a really good point.
He's got to be on it. Where Uyghur, I think, is a little bit more versatile. You can probably play him on the left side on your first, second, third pair. Same on the right side, which I think makes him a really attractive candidate in that way. I also think if you're talking about a year from now with the Olympics, I think you got to factor that into who do you expect to be bringing a year from now? Is Pietrangelo, is that changing your story? Because if it's still Pietrangelo next year, then maybe it is Drew Doughty, because like this is your last hurrah, Drew. Like enjoy it, your last time wearing Team Canada colors. He is getting up there in age, but Pietrangelo is not the only injury. Drew Doughty's not the only injury question right now for the Four Nations. The one country that is just going through it, Sweden. Both their goalies are question marks, and another one of their centers as well. And I'm curious to see how they replace a guy like Markstrom or Carlson, or if those guys fight back to make it in time for the roster, because they haven't fully bowed out themselves. But there's a lot going on in Sweden.
Yeah, we talk about the injuries here, and Pietrangelo is the first player to officially withdraw, but Team Sweden has a bit of an injury crisis maybe going on. Jacob Markstrom's the big one. He's not officially out of the tournament yet. All expectation is that he won't play because he's not going to play a single NHL game leading up until the tournament in this next little stretch here. That's a pretty good indication that he's probably not going to be good to go. So that's one goalie you need to replace. Linus Ullmark, it seems like he's going to be back before the Four Nations, which is a great sign, because if you're talking about Markstrom coming out as a starter, who do you want to step in? It's either Philip Gustafsson or the other goalie that they have on the roster right now, Linus Ullmark. He's been out for a while now, since he hasn't played a game in 2025 yet. Seems like he's going to be back soon. But the other two big ones are William Karlsson, who's out week to week on injured reserve for the Golden Knights. We talked about a certain Golden Knight earlier. He's somebody that could be out of the lineup for Team Sweden here. So there's a forward that you got to replace in addition to at least one goaltender, assuming that Karlsson isn't in there. And then there's Jonas Brodin as well, who has been out since early January. We don't really know what his timeline is. The head coach for Team Sweden spoke recently in Sweden and said that they're still not really sure what his status is going to be. They hope to see him play a couple games leading up to Four Nations. But there's a real scenario where Team Sweden, with all these players that are currently out, and there's a couple other players on other rosters that are currently banged up, but Team Sweden could potentially have to replace a forward, a defenseman, and a goaltender, all leading into Four Nations, and maybe multiple at some of those positions. So we'll start up front. I think the big one you look at forward is Rickard Rakell, who was the big snub early on. He's top 4, I believe, in Swedish goals this season. He's got over 20 this season. He's a pretty clear-cut guy to step in. Or they could go the younger route, somebody like a William Eklund or some of those younger guys coming up. Speaking of younger guys, on the back end, Hampus Lindholm is the big one that you would look to if he's healthy. But again, that's another guy that's currently injured and hasn't played for a while. So I look to maybe a young gun that could really step up leading into the Olympics, like we kind of mentioned with the Pietrangelo discussion. I wonder about Simon Edvinsson. I think there was an interesting discussion to have him on the roster in the first place as one of the premier young defensemen in the NHL. He's playing over 20 minutes, some hard minutes with the Detroit Red Wings. We talk about a guy that would be comfortable just being on the team, not necessarily playing. I think it would be a great experience for Edvinsson, even just for the rest of the season, to be around that Swedish roster with some of those top-end guys, Hedman, Karlsson, Ekholm, all those elite, older, though, Swedish defensemen, and have a young guy kind of step in there to bring some fresh blood into a roster for a guy that's probably going to be on Sweden's top pairing when you look over the next decade plus of best-on-best tournaments. And then you get to the goaltending, where you might need to replace two guys. And it gets pretty thin pretty quickly. You look at the trio of Markstrom, Ullmark, and Gustafsson, probably right up there, arguably the best in the tournament. Markstrom went down. We don't expect to see him in this tournament. So who comes in to replace them? It's not great options. You're looking at Sam Ersson from the Flyers, Arvid Soderblom from the Blackhawks, and if it's not one of those two, then you're going to literal young guns, like backup options, and guys currently playing in the AHL. You look at Marcus Högberg, who's been good for the Islanders. He's also currently hurt right now, so that's another guy that's down as an option. Then you're looking at like Dennis Hildeby from the Leafs, Jesper Wallstedt from the Wild, who hasn't had a good season in the AHL. Like, it gets pretty thin there. So you're probably looking at a Sam Ersson or an Arvid Soderblom to step in for Markstrom. But if Ullmark is also out, if he comes back and isn't great to go, then it gets very thin in the Swedish crease.
I'm curious what Ottawa thinks about this, because I'm sure with the Pietrangelo situation, I'm sure it was a conversation with the Vegas Golden Knights, being like, I'm going through this, what do you guys think? And they ask him, what's your priority? And he's like, my priority is to win a cup. I'm sure that's kind of how I picture that conversation going down. Ottawa's in the playoff hunt. They're there. They're right there. And Ullmark coming back is so important for their chances. He comes back, plays one game, great, goes to the Four Nations, comes back banged up, misses the rest of the season. Senators fans, like, that would be crushing.
He was hurt earlier than the season, too. Like, it's been an ongoing thing. When he's been healthy, he's looked great for the most part. But he's been injured. Yeah. He's played, like, 20 games. I mean, he should be around 40 at this point. And the thing with Sweden, like, I'm a little worried about them, to be honest, because Karlsson, really good defensive player. Brodin, really good defensive player. And then you look at the goalies that are hurt. Like, what's it going to look like on a defensive level for this team? And who knows? Maybe some guys miraculously recover, and it isn't that big of a deal, but there's none of those guys are kind of like offensive stars where you go, okay, we'll just plug in a new guy. Like, it's a big part of sort of their structure and a part of how they may win or challenge for the trophy here. And
we talk about some of the forward replacements there. Rickard Rakell having a good offensive season, not great season in his own zone, and William Eklund, a fun offensive young player, not great in his own zone as well.
I think with Sweden, out of the four countries, and we'll get into this over the next few weeks, I think they're probably one country that's in the most transitionary phase amongst the other ones. Like, Finland is kind of in a prime with these, like, Aho and Rantanen, who are now playing together. But, like, they're in a prime there with those guys. Obviously, Canada, you have Crosby, McDavid, and Bedard. You have all three of your generational guys.
The transition kind of already happened without the tournaments being played.
But Bedard is not on this team. And one team he would be on would be, the last time we saw Best on Best was when we had this U23 Team North America. He would be on a U23 team in 2025. And I thought it'd be fun because we got weeks to talk about Four Nations coming up. I want to reminisce about Four Nations back in 2016 because this roster today is fantastic. The amount of star talent is unbelievable. McDavid, Eichel, like McKinnon. That is three
literal all-stars.
Literally, these Matthews. I think that's four of probably the top 5-6 centers in the entire NHL. It's incredible. And then you also look through. You're like, wow, Brandon Saad was on that team, and Ryan Murray's retired. And I want to talk about 2025. What would that team look today? So I thought it would be fun to create a team in 2025 using these U23 guys. And down the middle is really interesting because I think the best player on the team in 2025 would be Jack Hughes by and far. I don't think there's a player on that team in 2016 that is as good as Hughes is currently today.
Okay.
Yeah. McDavid, I think, is like probably would have been by a year later. He had 100 points. But if you compare the center groups, what do you guys think here? Hughes, Bedard, Celebrini, Beniers versus a 2016 version, you got to make sure that note, of McDavid, Eichel, Nugent Hopkins, and Couturier.
Yeah, I mean, if you just compare like 1 through 4, I think that's the best way to do it. So Hughes versus whatever 19-year-old McDavid. I'm gonna take 23-year-old Hughes. Sounds crazy when you know what McDavid is now, but he only had 48 games or so. He just had his rookie season, coming off some injuries in that season. He wasn't peak McDavid. So, okay, we give 2025 a check mark there. And then you go Bedard versus Eichel. So this one's interesting because I feel like it's like kind of a tie because both kind of one-dimensional at this point in their careers and roughly around the same age. So, okay, you move down to the third spot, Celebrini versus Nugent Hopkins. I might go on a limb and say that Celebrini's already or very close to like passing peak Nugent Hopkins.
Ooh.
And 2016 obviously wouldn't have been peak Nugent Hopkins. So Celebrini's all-around game, how polished he is as a rookie, I give that a huge check for 2025. You go down to the fourth spot, kind of tough to analyze because Couturier wasn't quite at his Selke Trophy caliber, version of himself that he ended up being in like 2019. But he was in a pretty good spot back in 2016. Whereas Beniers, the stock's been up and down with him. The adjustment to the NHL has been a bit of a roller coaster. So I probably side with Couturier by a hair. But if you add all this up, I think I give 2025 like a slight edge, which seems kind of crazy to say. But Celebrini is just such a dog there in the third spot. Such an elite player at such a young age. Whereas Nugent Hopkins, I've always felt, obviously a great player, but like isn't really in that superstar caliber tier and has never been, including in 2016.
I think it's as close to a wash as you can really get it. It really depends on how does a 23-year-old Hughes actually do against a 19, 20-year-old McDavid. That's really interesting to me because the rest of it is pretty close. The age factor, I think, helps there with the Hughes and the experience. But the wingers, that's one big difference on this 2016 team. There's a lot of wingers who are naturally centermen that they took a lot of centermen. I wonder, is that just a thing with players now? There's a lot more wingers coming through the ranks because I guess there haven't been as many U23 North American centers because there aren't that many on this roster. Mm-hmm. There's a lot more wingers to choose from. But there are some really talented wingers in 2025. I got Boldy, Jarvis, Lafreniere, Johnston, Johnson, back-to-back. Byfield, Cooley, Perfetti. I think Cooley's the only quote-unquote center. I think a couple other guys can play down the middle, but have been playing most of their time on the wingers. How would you guys compare 2025's group to the 2016 one?
Yeah, I think it's interesting because, like you were saying, like that 2016 group, there was just so many good players that they didn't really care about positions. So you got like the McKinnons, the Matthews, Trocheck even, Scheifele, like guys who play center now playing on the wing. And I mean, you look at some of these names and it seems a bit ridiculous that they were all on this 2016 roster. At the same time, but I'm kind of sticking with John's point in the sense of, first of all, this group at the 2025, they're a bit older, but they've actually done more as of where they're at in the NHL right now than what that 2016 group had done. I went through and I kind of calculated how many points each group has prior to, like, if the 2025 team was playing right now. They had like almost 400 more combined points than the 2016 group. I mean, you look at Austin Matthews, he was 18. He hadn't played in the NHL yet. Yep. Guys like Larkin, Drouin, like just getting their feet wet. But I think it's still interesting to note kind of because you look at how polished that 2016 group looks now. Nate McKinnon has had the same amount of points as Alexis Lafreniere does right now. And Lafreniere's coming off his fourth season in which he had more points than McKinnon did entering this tournament. So I think that's kind of been super eye-opening to me is just, you know, we kind of forget once they get so good, like the McKinnons and stuff of the world, how they started off, and it was a bit slow. And so to be able to look at those groups right now and see that with the 2025 guys, you wouldn't expect Alexis Lafreniere to be Nate McKinnon down the road, but it's kind of following the same trajectory. So I won't go through and individually, guy by guy, match this up, but I think I would give the edge to 2016 based just purely on the talent there, but 2025, this group of wingers isn't far off.
I think it makes me think that maybe we are a little quick to judge with young prospects, right? Yes. We were spoiled with McDavid and Matthews because they came in and were just unbelievable instantly. That nowadays, Lafreniere, Byfield, they're starting to get better.
You could put Shane Wright on this board and show me those guys from then and show me Shane Wright, and I'd be like, maybe we'll pick it up. Maybe
I think we need to give these guys a little bit more credit. I will say, though, with this 2016 team, they're younger too, with the points thing. Like the Matthews thing is big, and like Johnny Gaudreau had only played a couple years, but he was coming in, he'd won a Hobie Baker and then came and played like a year or two already in the league. Brandon Saad's like the most experienced 2016 guy on this team, but I think I agree with the 2016 side. You guys, your thoughts on it?
It's a fascinating one. Like the center thing to winger is really interesting to me. Like you look at the 2025 guys and it's like Cooley is playing center regularly for Utah, but like Johnston can play down the middle. Like there's a couple other guys there as well. So I'm interested to see how over their careers progress, how many of these guys actually do end up at center here. But looking at the 2016 forward group versus 2025, like it is a little bit interesting where you have to change the math on it a little bit because this was beginning of the 16-17 season versus mid 24-25. So there's a little bit that changes there. and then obviously the name value that you go for 2016. But that 2025 group, you've got some really, really good players in that group that when we look at the same timeline almost a decade later back to 2025, I think we'll probably look at this collection of players in a similar way we do the 2016 group right now.
Two guys I wanted to quickly highlight. Vincent Trocheck, when he was on this team, kind of just to throw in, okay, it's a guy who was a fairly high draft pick. He's whatever. I feel like his stock has risen significantly over the last couple of years where even if you had done this in 2020, you'd still go, Trocheck. But now, he's on the Four Nations team and rightfully, and he has, such versatility. I just feel like he's really taken his game to the next level the last couple of years and has like kind of entered close to star territory, whereas back in the day he was just kind of a guy. And then Brandon Saad obviously is kind of the other direction, where at this point this young stud now just a middle six forward somewhere, right?
Where does
like
Brandon
he's just
Saad
a guy
play?
St. Louis.
St. Louis,
with the
yeah,
Blues.
makes sense.
Yeah.
But I was also the other name, JT Miller, only played one game at the tournament. You look at it now, 10 years later, basically, he's one of the most premier guys on this roster. I'm curious, on this 2025, which guy is the JT Miller that maybe we're a little down on him right now that ends up being unbelievable into his late 20s, early 30s, and then which guy is the Brandon Saad? I think, for me, it feels like the JT Miller, like, could that be an Alexis Lafreniere or a Quentin Byfield kind of thing?
Yeah, a little closer in terms of like the prototype of being a power forward.
Could a Brandon Saad be a Seth Jarvis type, a guy playing on a really good team that maybe I don't know. I really like Seth Jarvis though.
Yeah,
he's really good, man.
He's a dog.
I don't know. It's hard to predict really good players falling off, but it does happen.
So from the standpoint of like point production, I actually think Seth Jarvis is closer to a JT Miller type, where I think just like the absolute dog on a bone, like this type of style that he plays. Over his career, I could see him having some really, really productive seasons over his career later on. So it's an interesting discussion. And you don't want to point out like who's going to have like a poor progression or anything like that. Kent Johnson's an interesting one where he just popped off this season. He's having really good progression. I like his future. I wonder about somebody like a Cole Perfetti, a very intelligent player. The foot speed isn't necessarily there, so I wonder if he's somebody that could peak in his mid-20s and then maybe doesn't age as well as the foot speed starts to go and it's already a bit of a negative.
Yeah.
Granted, he's a very intelligent player, so as we stand right now, obviously as we did in 2016, we thought all these guys would be great. It's tough to pick out one, and then I think the other one you point to is Matty Beniers and whether he can figure out the offensive side again, or if he actually ends up being like a good defensive 2C, but never really hits that other gear.
Yeah, is he the Couturier of this group, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Does he slide into a more of a defensive role?
Sean Couturier, before the injuries, though, was a premier 1C.
Could Beniers be one of those next guys to enter the Selke conversation year after year? Will be an interesting question because those guys are just as valuable as the I don't know. I can't even say he's going to be as valuable as the celebrating guard. Those guys are too good.
No.
Let's go to the defense here. Defense group's really, really interesting because on paper, the 2016 team is like kind of bad. But like Shane Gostisbehere was electric at this point.
Yeah.
Colton Parayko's on Team Canada in 2025. So you look at 2025 like U23 guys, which guy is the Colton Parayko that really just stays good in his entire career? Which guy we might not hear much after in 2 or 3 years' time from now?
Well, that's the fascinating thing looking at Team North America from 2016 is how the defensive group progressed over the rest of their careers, where you can argue that all of these guys have had pretty shaky careers to an extent. Morgan Riley's been a consistent guy with the Maple Leafs, but has had a couple of off seasons maybe the last couple of years. Colton Parayko is the guy that you probably point to as being consistent throughout, but Shane Gostisbehere at one point was waived and traded along with a high second-round pick to the Arizona Coyotes. Jacob Trouba, we just saw everything that happened with him this season. Ryan Murray was out of the league before he turned 30, and Seth Jones had one of the most bloated contracts in the league.
Has one of the most still.
You can argue about that and everything with his value, but when it was signed and the trade that happened, it was like one of the most disastrous moves for a franchise that we saw at the time. And then you look at the 2025 group, and thinking about any of their careers progressing the same way is very surprising. Like a Bowen Byron type has had some ups and downs. Owen Power hasn't quite hit those same heights. But like you look at the overall group of the guys that you have here, and it would be very surprising to see any of those guys have their careers pan out the same way. And so for me, looking at these two groups, it's really the stylistic kind of fit for all of these defensemen that is most interesting to me, where you look at that 2016 group and you have kind of the two-way guys in Parayko and Jones, but Jacob Trouba very much a defense-first guy, even though he scored some goals early in his career. Ryan Murray, very much a defensive guy. Shane Gostisbehere and Morgan Rielly, very much the opposite of that, where they're pretty much the pure offensive types. And you look at the 2025 group, Jake Sanderson, one of the premier two-way defensemen in the league, one of the best skaters in the league. Brock Faber, one of the best two-way defenders in the league. And then you look to Thomas Harley, who's been one of the best complementary defensemen in the NHL over the past year, playing alongside a Miro Heiskanen type. And so there are the offensive guys like the Lane Hudson type, and Owen Power probably leans more offensive than defense, but that's another two-way guy there as well. So I look at the 2025 guys, and they feel a lot more well-rounded in their group versus almost the specialist types in 2016. And so talking about the guys that might progress well and might not, we look at Shane Gostisbehere peaking very early in his career. Does a Lane Hudson type have something like that? Like, that's the clear one-to-one.
Yeah.
I don't think that's the way it'll go, but we also didn't think that was the way it would go in 2016.
Yeah. Hindsight's weird, right? Where it's like you look back and you just, in your head, you're like, I can't get away from the current status of, say, Gostisbehere or Murray being retired. But it's hard to go back. The one thing I'll just say about this 2025 team is, like, it's almost showing the evolution of the defenseman position in general.
Yes.
All those guys are high-end skaters. Like Harley is arguably like a top 5 skater in the league. Sanderson, phenomenal. Faber, Byron Power, Hudson, like, they're all, like, if you're doing a scouting report, they're all getting A's, A+, on the skating.
I just can't, like, think that any of these guys are out of the league in 10 years now. I just can't.
Well,
and I think Ryan Murray's the
Byron's
exception.
got the concussion issues, but that's different than Ryan Murray too. Like,
he had
Ryan,
some injury stuff,
he
but
did, but
I also think Ryan Murray's the exception, not the rule, where
Yes.
there has to be a guy that
true.
has a
100%.
career play out this way. I think it's much more likely that if somebody doesn't hit those peaks, it's a Brandon Saad or a Shane Gostisbehere or a Jacob Trouba, where they're still in the league, they still have a role to a certain extent, but maybe they have a bit of a roller coaster type career versus Ryan Murray, who had some injuries and never really panned out the way that you thought. I'm pretty sure, the top drafted defenseman of this group was Ryan Murray, second overall. And he's the guy that was out of the league fastest.
Well, the other guy that was on this roster but only played one game was the highest drafted, and that was Aaron Ekblad. He only played one game. He might be the best of all these guys today. Maybe Parayko, Rielly, you can kind of...
And he was 20 years old at the time.
Yes, but he played one game for this team. He was probably the most hyped out of all of these guys on this team, first overall pick. But... he wasn't one of the first 6 on the team sheet for most of the games.
Didn't play a regular role.
There you go. I want to quickly touch on the goaltending before we move off of this U23 thing. It's been really fun. In 2025, it's Dustin Wolf and Spencer Knight, 2 American guys that are really unexperienced. In 2016, it was John Gibson, Matt Murray, and the third goalie, probably one of the greatest goaltenders of all time by the time he's done, is Connor Hellebuck. He didn't even dress a game. But
Crazy.
Gibson and Murray were the guys. Gibson was electric to start his career.
Elite goaltender.
But I have to say, Dustin Wolf has been just as good to start his NHL career. He has been incredible. I don't really know how to separate these guys, but I will say 2016 is clear.
Yeah.
Because at the end of the day, they're just way more experienced.
Murray had won a cup.
He won a cup, but he wasn't starting the games. It was Gibson, because Gibson was touted to be the next great goaltender in the NHL. I don't think anybody's touting Wolf or Knight to be the next premier goalie in the NHL. Wolf is getting a lot of hype, but again, he's played 30 games in the NHL or whatever, 25 games or something like that. He does have an AHL MVP to his name. But,
Not a big deal.
I think I would take the 2016 guys here.
And the other thing to talk about with the goaltenders is the 2016 team was the beginning of the season versus 25 group in the middle of the season. It's a very different standpoint for Dustin Wolf, for example, if it's the limited sample we've seen to this point leading into the season or mid-season Calder Trophy candidate Dustin
Yes,
Wolf.
if we're talking about 2025 in September and Dustin Wolf wins the Calder, gets Vezina votes and Hart votes because he leads the Flames to the playoffs, then maybe we might be giving them a little bit more credit. But as of today, I say 2016 is clear. Before we move on, I'm going to say 7-game series. Who wins this 7-game series? Personally, I got the 2016 team, but what do you guys think?
I will go 2025.
Wow.
Because I think that their defense is significantly better than the 2016 group.
Gotcha.
Yeah, if they're playing in today's game, I'd go 2025, right? I guess that's what we're doing. If we're bringing it to the present, that mobility is just phenomenal on the back end, and the goaltending is good enough to sort of fix whatever's going on up front, because I feel like up front, if you go through the centers and the wingers, 2016's beating 2025, but the defense and the goaltending, I'll take 2025.
Yeah, I think one game, I'd give it to 2016. I think they've got enough firepower there to get past, but like a 7-game grueler, I just think eventually 2025 comes around and outmuscles them.
There we go.
All right.
So.
That's an interesting one to think about. It makes me really excited about the future of the young players in the NHL. If we're thinking that the 2025 guys could be as good as these guys that we see them today.
And I also do want to note that it's a lot more fun to see these guys on Team Canada, Team USA, instead of the Team U23 North America group. It was fun for what it was, but I would much rather see these guys on the actual national teams.
100%. And that brings us to our next segment, and that is Emptying the Notebook. Emptying the Notebook, brought to you by Enterprise. And I want to throw this over to you, John, because there's a lot of talk about future international tournaments, international events at least. It might be run by the NHL, not the IIHF. And I want to know, is there going to be room for specialty teams in these future events?
Yeah, I'll get to the specialty team part in a second here, but first of all, let's talk about the international calendar. So you'll hear Bill Daly and Gary Bettman talk about this a lot, where they try to set it up in succession. So it'll go, say next year, Olympics, then the next year it'll be All-Star, which I realize is not international, but it's another tournament to break up the season. And then you're going to go to a World Cup in 2028, and then you'll do it all over again, and All-Star, Olympics, etc., rinse and repeat. So they want to get on that schedule. They've been trying. You know, sometimes I think that they come up with excuses to why they should not go to the Olympics, but that's kind of a story for another day. And the thing with the World Cup, and so if we consider Four Nations sort of like a mini World Cup, they've done 1996, 2004, 2016, and then 2025. What's the theme there? It's way too long between tournaments, so they need to get on the schedule, because part of the problem with these World Cups over the years is there's less legacy, less history tied to it. Back in the day, obviously the Canada Cup was a whole big deal, but they need to get back into the swing of things to make this something where Pietrangelo doesn't bow out, because it's just so meaningful and it's such a big part of the calendar. So there's that component to it. And then another thing I'll say is that the reason why, and people watching at home might be going, why Four Nations? Well, if it's an NHL run event, at least this year, they've gone with just nations that can do a full roster with NHL contracted players. So that leaves only 4 teams. And Finland was really close to not, hitting that threshold. And of course, you've got a team like Russia, who right now is not playing any international hockey or really any international sports to my knowledge. So that's how you get down to 4 nations. And the thing with future World Cups is that there's a couple things that probably need to happen. One, maybe they have to move the World Cup to before the season, so that these European players on, say, Slovakia, they can play before their season starts in Europe, and we're all good. Like, maybe there's a loan agreement, but we're all good in terms of the players in Europe not having to leave their club team to come play. So maybe September solves a lot of the issues. But again, the 2016 World Cup in September wasn't great. The sort of like intensity wasn't quite there. You want to have it mid-season. Another component to it is just that, with Russia, I feel like in 2028, the NHL is just going to kind of let them join the fray again. Because I think that the problem with the Four Nations setup is that the tournament becomes smaller. It becomes less of a best-on-best, true best-on-best style. So you want that team that has Kaprizov, that has all these star players. Would have been great to have Alex Ovechkin in this tournament, of course, especially as he marches towards the goal record. So there's that going on, where there's like the eligibility problem. But I feel like if they get to the 2028 World Cup and they're still at Four Nations, there's still problems with Russia, they can't figure out this loan agreement with the other European countries, maybe they do have a couple of specialty teams again, just to kind of hold them over. Because I feel like the Four Nations, it's going to be great, but I think it's going to come and go pretty quickly. And, there's going to be something, missing there. So I wonder if they circle back on the specialty teams. And that also ties into the last thing I want to talk about, which is Gary Bettman's retirement. So he's not retiring anytime soon next year, but it could be in a couple of years. He's 72. He's sort of inching towards that retirement age when he exits. And I talked to Bill Daly about this in 2022, so things may have changed. It's been a bit, but I asked him about taking over for Bettman, and he basically said, hey, listen, I'm not that much younger than Gary. Like, I think that the league's going to want a younger person, maybe someone from outside, the hockey world. And so that gets you thinking in terms of, like, do they bring in someone who has a totally fresh look at things and says, we like specialty teams. We like doing things different in hockey. So, do they come from outside the sport? Do they come from within the league office but have been sitting around at their desk all day going, we should be doing things differently? Do they empower someone that's got, different ideas? So I wonder if that factors into it too. But there'll be a lot of talk about Bill Daly taking over. And I feel like, even though it could happen, I feel like it's less likely to happen than it happening. I feel like he's, a little too old and they'll go for someone younger. Because it's kind of a young person's job if you want to commit to one person over a long stretch. Bettman's been in power since '93. So if you want someone else,
how many Canadian teams have won a cup since then?
Yeah, exactly. Conspiracy.
Here we go.
No, I'm getting. It will be interesting to see how that does impact the future of these international events and the future of this league, because it's a pivotal point.
Yes.
All these leagues are at really pivotal points, and the next leader will probably be in charge for the next 15 to 20 years. And we'll see what they can do with it. We know what Gary's done with it. Also, obviously, some of it's been great. Some of it we might not like. But in the future, it'll be even more. And more changes year by year, which will be really, really exciting stuff. Thanks for that. I want to get, though, into probably one of my favorite parts of Top Shelf, and that is our trivia. So I think I got the board here.
Yes.
And we've been doing this for a few weeks now, and I have a big old donut. So today, that changes. Levi, take us.
He's calling a shot.
away.
Yeah. Wow. Good.
Okay, mess.
Super confident there. We'll have to see how that goes. But yeah.
This is Game 7 too, technically.
All right.
Yeah. Right. Yeah, we got Kyle's check down from last week, I believe so.
I think I'm at 4, but that's okay.
I was gonna say.
I'll work on that later.
I didn't want to
have no
mention
marker
behind
on
the
it.
scenes.
I didn't want to be that guy.
Yeah.
But no, I mean, we're talking Four Nations today, so I think the only direction I can go with the trivia for you guys today is something nationality based. So what I did today, there are 18 countries represented currently by NHL players. So we're going to go through all 18. I just need you to name one guy from each country, so we'll take turns. So Kyle will get Canada, John will get the U.S., and we'll go and go. And so I'm expecting, obviously the front end of this, you guys should breeze
I'm
through.
gonna lose.
Then we get to the countries that I don't even know if you'll be able to recognize the flag, and I'm going to want a guy from those countries. So that's where it gets interesting.
Okay.
But that's the precipice. Can you name an active player from every NHL country?
Let's
We're
do
going to
it.
start here with, we'll start with you, Kyle, because you won last time. We start with Canada. Can you name a Canadian NHL player right now?
Alex Pietrangelo.
Alex
Oh.
Pietrangelo. Nicely done. Yes, that's correct. 1 point for Kyle. On to John with the next country. And, of course, it is the U.S.
Jack Eichel.
Jack Eichel's correct. 263 players there. John went with maybe the most obvious one. On to Aidan with the third country here, Sweden.
Rasmus Anderson.
Rasmus Anderson. There you go. Good pull. All right. Point each through the first 3 countries. Obviously, easiest by far. Next up, Kyle, I believe we have Russia.
Ooh, Russia next. Alex Ovechkin.
Alex Ovechkin, that's correct. There
Who's
we
that
go.
guy?
There we go. Yeah, I heard of him. Finland for your next country.
Henry Jokiharju.
Ooh.
There we go. There we
Let's
go.
get
That's
some
the
deep
most
cut
fun
in.
name to say in the
Yeah,
NHL
getting
right
into
there.
the bag of tricks here a little bit. And Czechia.
Czechia.
Do you
That's
have a
pasta,
Czech?
right?
David Pasternak is
Pasternak.
correct. Nicely done. All right, we're through 6 countries. Gets a little bit smaller now. Switzerland only has 11 guys playing. Do you have a Switz player for me?
I wish I could say my guy Dennis Mulligan. He's not in the league anymore, so Roman Josi.
Roman Josi is correct. Yes, definitely a little bit more popular than Dennis Mulligan. I'll say that. John, next country, Germany.
Leon Draisaitl.
Yes, there you go. That's the nice thing about these countries is that they still have one guy. Obviously, Mo Seider maybe, but after that, for those, gets a little bit dicey. Aidan, do you have a Slovak? 9th country on the board,
I
7
should.
players.
So the name that comes to my mind got kicked out of the league last year. Adam Ruzicka was a Slovakian guy.
That's such a Flames fan
But
thing
is
to
it
Yeah.
Thomas Tatar, a Slovakian?
Thomas Tatar is Slovakian.
Hey, nice.
He's got 500 points. The next closest is Eric Chernak with 98.
My,
so
my good buddy had
Chernak.
he's Slovakian. He had a Tatar jersey.
there you
Nice.
go. There you go.
Nice.
Yeah, I'd say Tatar, Chernak, and Slavkovsky. That's
Okay,
really
yeah,
that's
Slav
really
was
it.
the
I
guy that
guess
came to mind.
Simone Nemec, but he hasn't
Yeah,
really done
yeah.
much yet. That's correct. So that's 3 points for each of you guys. 6 countries left. Gets really tough here.
Denmark.
Denmark for you, Kyle. Do you have a Dane?
Freddie Anderson.
Freddie Anderson is correct.
I did not know that.
Yes.
I just
yeah,
assumed he was
yeah.
a Swede.
I think.
I just assumed.
Very
yeah.
Swedish name.
On to you, John. Next country we're going with is Latvia. Do you have a Latvian?
Zemgus Girgensson.
Zemgus
Girgensson,
nice.
very good pull. Other
Latvian.
than him, you get Elvis Merzlikins, Balinskis, Seelovs. It's tight.
Yeah.
It's tight with
Few goalies.
Yeah,
Ooh,
Teddy.
10
goalies
from
there.
Latvia.
Goalie
Yeah.
Nation.
All
Martyrs
right,
Bay.
12th country here, Aidan. Belarus.
Belarus.
Do you have a Belarusian?
Yes, I do.
I knew
was
you
like,
would.
there
Igor
you go.
Sharon Govich.
Very convenient for you
Sharon
to get
Govich.
Belarus.
Yeah,
Come
no.
on, it's
Flame
lined up
roster.
perfectly for me.
Crazy,
right
yeah,
now.
that is. Yeah.
I do not know any of the other ones.
Igor Sharangovich is obviously the big one. Other than that,
Protus.
Protus,
Oh, nice.
Kolosov, and Kolyachonok.
There you go.
Not sure I know exactly who that is, but you got one.
Healthy
Utah
stature.
Hockey Club.
Oh,
There we go. There we go. So that's 4 points for each of you. Do I have that math correct or
I
5?
think so.
3 or 4.
Let me
Three
do
or
some
four.
quick
I think it's
double
4.
check. Yeah, it is 4. So you only got 3 countries left. No, I lied. That's you've got 6 countries left now. Start with Norway. Only 2 players. So it's 2 players or less the rest of the way.
Just suspended Emil Lilleberg.
Emil
Wow.
Lilleberg.
Instead of Matt Zuccarello. That's
I was gonna say.
Hey, if we're going for some deep
Yeah.
cuts here,
I
put
love
them
it.
on.
Pull.
I
What a
love it.
pull. That is correct. Yeah. 5 points for you. On to the next for you, John. I'm just waiting on it. Austria. Do you have an
Thomas
Austrian?
Vanek is not around
No,
anymore.
he is
oh,
not.
Marco Rossi.
Marco Rossi's
Nice.
correct. Nicely done. Yes, he's definitely the more prolific one. Although I think the other guy, Marco Casper. Who's
Yeah, that's pretty
Oh,
good.
yeah.
got a bit of a name
Yeah,
to
pretty
himself.
good.
So those 2 are fine. Last country here, Aidan.
Slovenia.
Do you have the only Slovenian player in
course
the
he
NHL?
does.
Wait, I do? Oh,
I
no.
hope you do.
Oh my gosh.
One of the best two-way players in the league.
You're
Wait,
getting all the hints
wait,
here.
wait.
It's supposed to
wait.
be,
Oh, no.
In my head, I am thinking, we talked about it earlier about specialty teams and about guys who were around in 2016.
Okay.
If I'm wrong, I'm wrong. You guys said 2-way players, so my head just went to Kopitar, but I'm assuming it's wrong.
have said that.
Ozzy Topidar's correct.
Come on.
Yeah.
Come on. The game.
What an assist from John.
Clutch
there.
it out.
You were grasping at straws. I
Yeah,
threw you a lifeline.
nice.
You did throw me a lifeline with that.
I'm surprised though
I don't know
because
why I did, but
he played they played in the Olympics. The Kopitar's dad was the coach. His brother was on the team. So
yeah, he's very dedicated. To
yeah,
the
there's
yeah, I'm
Slovenian
not gonna lie.
through.
That's a shot.
All right,
Dark, got
we
it.
got the last 3. Everyone's got 5 points here. The last 3 I think are the hardest. We start with you, Kyle. Do you know the only French player in the league?
Alexander Texier.
Alexander Texier. Bear with me. Correct. Correct.
Nice.
For a while it was Pierre-Edouard Bellemare.
Yep. Yeah.
Is he out of the
Alexander
league now?
Texier.
Yeah, he's like 40 years.
Oh, wow.
He's
All
an
right.
old man.
Fair enough.
Texier's correct. Kyle's alive still. John, you have the Netherlands.
Oh,
Do you know this
you
one?
ready?
Oh, he knows it.
Daniel Sprong.
Daniel Sprong's
Nice.
correct. Great
Nice.
get.
Wow,
That's
so-
impressive.
If I pass, is just Kyle just get the dub if he
No,
has
no,
the steal,
no.
or they both get
We'll,
a shot?
we'll go to tiebreaker.
Okay, they go
Oh,
to tiebreaker.
oh, I
if
see what
pass.
you're saying.
Wait,
Yeah.
I got it. This is Sean Walker. Australia?
Final answer?
No, it's not Sean Walker.
You got that wrong.
Isn't it Walker? He played
This
in Washington.
this one could be controversial.
This is very
No.
controversial.
You're
There's-
on the right track.
There's
but it's
technically
wrong.
2 options.
Oh, because he grew up in Australia. Okay, well I got it wrong. I guess Sean Walker, but he grew up in Australia. Isn't actually Australia.
You're thinking of the wrong Walker.
You're thinking of the wrong
what's
Walker.
It is Nathan Walker, right?
Yeah.
No.
Nathan Walker.
No.
Do we? I don't know. This is
Should we just skip
Can I-
that?
uncharted territory.
I
Or no,
got-
how about you jump in with another guy?
Well, there's
I got
a
one.
tie.
No, no, no.
break anyways.
So Nathan Walker grew up in Australia, but the first Australian-born player is Jordan Spence of the LA Kings.
Oh.
that I didn't even know that. I just have Nathan Walker down here.
There you go. That works. That
I
works.
think that's a steal.
But
So-
there was
No. Hey, if we have a tiebreaker.
there was supposed to be a tiebreaker for the two.
I
of them.
have a tiebreaker.
I'm out though.
I have a
I did say
tiebreaker.
Sean Walker.
Yes, you did say
Wrong
the wrong
Walker.
The wrong Walker. Yeah, we'll send it to a tiebreaker. Although that tidbit probably should have gotten you there.
Just
Kyle.
because they played the Australia game.
Yeah.
Good shout.
For the sake of the tiebreaker, though, it's a good tiebreaker for the two of you guys.
Okay.
First one to say a country and player from that country that is not on this list, so it can't be an active guy anymore. Go.
Can't be an active guy?
Not an active player. So a country that we didn't mention.
I think Robin Regier was born in Brazil.
He was. That is true. I can attest that. I don't know if his citizenship.
I don't know if
I
that
think
counts.
I think he
I
represented.
don't know if that counts.
I have it all here, so I can tell you.
Like he was born in Brazil, and that is.
If you want
for sure.
another one, I will say
They don't have him down.
Alexei Ponokrovsky for Ukraine.
Oh, that's
That
good.
is
That's a
correct.
good pull.
There you go.
That is correct. Alexei Ponokrovsky. There's a couple Ukrainians. Fedotenko, I believe, was
Yep.
as well.
Yep.
But that's correct. That's an answer I was looking for. A country no longer in the league. What a win for Kyle.
Do you got a pull for another
win.
country?
I don't think so. I got an active guy that we didn't bring up, Gorgiev.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, that's
Nice.
true. So
How
Kyle,
about some Nick
You rightfully win
Antropov
that one.
love for Kazakhstan as
Antropov
well.
is what I was thinking. There was a Japanese
That's an extra
goalie.
2 for Kyle,
Oh,
and all of a
is
sudden,
it Fujimoto?
Yes,
Kyle.
Yes, it
Comfortably.
Let's go.
is. Wow, great
Let's
win,
go,
Kyle.
Big dub.
big lead.
Great win, Kyle.
Ahead.
But I mean, I love the nationality.
Love
I
the nationality.
I'm
So
thinking
fun.
that once Four Nations starts, we should just like the actual tournament. We should just reset the board and give your boy a shot to get back in it. Because I can't keep getting texts from my dad's
he's
friends
dropping
telling me that I
like
suck
yeah.
at trivia. So.
I mean, you got Kyle here dropping Robin McGuire from Brazil. Like,
Yeah,
how do
that's
you
a-
even
the
compete? I'm
deepest
glad
of
I'm the
cuts.
one hosting.
I'm
I'll say
impressed.
that.
That's definitely not my. Like apparently, I didn't have that one in the bag. I can't believe Sean, the Walker one is tough.
That's a
It's
tough
close.
bounce.
Because
Yeah.
I remember there was a bunch of stories on him when he was in Washington, but it's just the
Huge
wrong
deal.
first name comes to mind. Is because Nathan Walker still playing in the league? I don't
Yeah,
know.
he's with
He is?
St. Louis.
Okay,
you go.
gotcha. There you go. Well, that's fun, and talking about countries is fun, but that's all we're going to be doing over the next few weeks here over at Top Shelf Face-Off Edition as we get ready for the Four Nations kicking off in early February, mid-February even. That's all the time we got, though, for our show, presented to you guys by Enterprise. I'm Aidan Thakkar, joined by John Matisz, Kyle Cushman, Levi Smith, and we will see you guys next time.